Good afternoon. Welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that there is a degree of repetition between this video and the previous one, in that they both involve a tea from Bhutan, a dark tea called Ja Aum. And the reason why we are revisiting that tea is the fact that we noticed how versatile it was when it came to brewing the tea. There were, in fact, three sets of brewing parameters provided by the vendor of the tea. One which produced a fairly standard black tea. The second was a recipe and brewing parameters for the Bhutanese and Tibetan, butter tea. And finally, there was a set of brewing parameters to produce a tea similar to chai, or one that was at least more familiar to Westerners, which had milk and potentially sweetener. So today we are going to investigate Ja Aum with a fourth set of brewing parameters just to see how versatile it is. And that's where the Gongfu part of this video's title comes from. Right from the off, I want to say that although Gongfu centers on brewing tea, it's much more than that. It's about art and culture and history and philosophy. And at its heart, it's about sharing, a shared collegiate experience of brewing and drinking tea. The reason it does that is that Gongfu relies on a series of short steepings of tea, each one providing a round of tea for visitors and hosts. And then as the tea is re-steeped, it can be another steeping, another round of tea for guests and hosts to share. So it's a communal experience, but it's also a way to break up an event, to break up an experience, to kind of ground it once again with those immortal words, more tea. All of that said, Gongfu is also very suitable even for one person investigating a tea on their own, because if you strip out the communal experience, in essence, it's about being able to explore a tea and what its flavor profile is like. In fact, you might say its flavor profiles at different stages of Gongfu after each steeping. Now, you might think that if you re-steep a volume of tea over and over, then very soon you're going to exhaust the flavor profile. However, Gongfu relies on quite a high concentration of tea to water, a very high ratio compared to normal brewed tea, which means that each steeping can be a matter of seconds, depending on how, depending on how versatile the tea is, how robust it is, or how delicate it is. Generally speaking, it's somewhere along the lines of 5 grams of tea to 100 mils of water, so 1 to 20. The temperature of the water depends on what kind of tea it is, and the length of each steeping also has an impact. So I have found online a set of brewing parameters, which I'll provide below along with the website in question. Online I found some Gongfu parameters for Ja Aum. Now it's 5 grams of tea, but it's 150 mils of water. Now there's a very important reason for that. I have actually tried in my own time to brew our Ja Aum in the Gongfu style, and I tried 5 grams to 100 mils. It was way too strong. It wasn't unpleasant at all, but even after 10 steepings, there was no reduction in the intensity of flavor and no way to separate out the different components of Ja Aum's flavor profile. So reducing the amount of tea, shifting the ratio from 1 to 20 to 1 to 30, I think will be important. Also, the temperature has been reduced down to 90 degrees, which is quite notable for a dark tea, which often benefit from higher temperature brewing. So that's going to slow down the rate at which the flavor molecules within the leaves are leached out into the water. Almost to balance that out, though, each steeping is a little longer than you might expect. So for first, second, third, and fourth steeping, we go from 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. We may not do all of those. It just depends on how quickly we can isolate what's going on in the tea. There's a couple of reasons why I wanted to um, undertake a Gongfu with Ja Aum. First of all, I really like the tea. There's also a flavor profile in there, that sort of medicinal element I mentioned in our last video. And it would be interesting if by using Gongfu we can separate that out almost, because that might make it slightly easier to identify. I also wanted to revisit Ja Aum because this is the first time that I have recorded myself carrying out Gongfu, and I'd rather do it with a tea that I'm familiar with. Trying to do this on the fly when I don't know the tea, so I don't know what the outcome is going to be, or even what it should be, is a very different prospect. So, as I say, this is genuine exploration. I don't know how this tea will cope with being put through Gongfu, although I think it will handle it very well. There's two other things I want to say about this very, very quickly before we begin. First of all, Gongfu is very versatile, not simply because you've got all these short, carefully managed steepings. It's also because you can adjust the parameters on the fly. If the water seems too hot, you can reduce the temperature. If it's not hot enough, you can increase the temperature. If the tea seems too dilute, reduce the amount of water on the next steeping. If not much flavor is coming out, then maybe add more seconds than you anticipated for the next brewing. So on the fly, in the hands of somebody much more experienced than I am, it's an extraordinary way to bring out the very best in the tea. For the purposes of this video, it's a real exploration for me and for you. So, very, very quickly, what do we have in front of us? We have our standard jug, a sampling teacup, a platter with our tea leaves. We have our wide-brimmed strainer, because Gongfu requires very fast pouring out of the tea. The reason being, especially with delicate teas, if each steeping is only 10 seconds, then you don't want to take 3 seconds to pour the tea out, because you've just heightened the risk that the tea has gone from being perfectly brewed, for a given value of perfect, to being oversteeped. And something like a green tea can be hazardous. We have our trusty 160ml teapot, and once the tea leaves are in there, along with the water, you're probably only going to fit 150 mils in. And finally, we have here, which we don't usually show, our wastewater jug. That's where we're going to put the tea that we don't drink from each steeping. It's also where we put the water that we use to heat the teapot and we use to heat the jug. So I'm just going to put some of this water in here. The kettle is set to 90 degrees. I could have gone down to 85, but I suspect that might be a little too low, but it can always be adjusted. So we're just going to let the teapot and the jug warm up. Time is pressing on, but it's not too bad, at least from my point of view. Let me show you the tea again, just to let you know what we're dealing with. Maybe you can tell it's pretty coarse material there. Incidentally, the website that provides these brewing parameters also gives a fair degree of information about how the tea is made, and it's a nice complement to the information from the vendor's website. So I think we can pour this out now. As I say, we want the water out as quickly as we can. Get that poured out as well. I might cheat, given this is nothing but plain water. I might put this back in the kettle, otherwise my wastewater will be overfilled. So let's introduce the tea finally to our warm teapot. Let's take a smell. Earthy, woody, with that kind of medicinal quality in the background on the dry leaves. Sometimes when the tea is warmed even by the pot, even if there's no water left in the pot, that can change the flavour. So I think that will be all of the tea. Take a quick smell. Yeah, it's that medicinal quality that's coming to the fore just by heating it. So I'll be very curious to know if we can work out what that is. So our first steeping is going to be for 30 seconds. And I count from the minute the water starts hitting the tea. Just count in my head. That's our first steeping. Quick as we possibly can, as I say. Right from the off, and that's quite noteworthy, that tea looks a lot more ruby in colour, a lot more like tea normally brews than it did even with the recommended version from before. It's a lot less opaque, and I would say it's a lovely ruby colour. I'm not sure if you can see that. Maybe if I turn it over the right way, you can see the red. I think you can see the red there. Okay, so that's our first steeping 30 seconds. Let's see what it's like on the nose. It's pretty well balanced. I don't think anything is coming out more strongly than the other. The wood is there, the earth is there, quite sweet, and something like medicinal quality. Now, because we're up against it here, I am going to pour this tea, and I am then going to pour in the water for the next steeping before we actually sample it. So this one will be for 40 seconds. Let's see how this tea comes out. Slange. It's a little thinner than I was expecting, but it's still hearty. It's not dilute. That medicinal quality is right there on the fore. Interesting that by diluting it, that's a sort of prominent flavour. Let's see what our next steeping is like. That's our 40 seconds up. Let's see how it comes out this time. Nearly poured it all over the table there, which is why we need this wide-brimmed strainer. Otherwise, I'd be getting in serious trouble. Now that's rather interesting. That is, I would say, considerably darker. Yeah, it's still fairly clear. It hasn't become opaque again, but you can probably, hopefully, you can see just how dark that is. A second steeping hasn't made this more dilute. It's almost as if it's woken up the tea. So our next brew is for, consult his notes, 60 seconds. So I'm definitely going to carry on talking. I don't want you just sitting there twiddling your thumbs, or more likely switching over to 60 seconds. In the meantime, let's try this tea once again. It's stronger. The woodiness has come through more on this steeping, and the medicinal quality is lingering in the background, but it's not as strong. It's really well balanced. That is very interesting. As I say, it can be quite a surprise as to what each steeping can bring to the tea. As I say, the lingering thing here is the woody notes, where they don't come out that strongly on the smell or how we brewed it in our last video. It's a earthy, it's a real savoury quality, and that medicinal quality is pretty much gone. So let's try our steeping, and this will be the last one. I have a suspicion this could go on for quite some time, but I don't want our video to go on for far too long. That is looking colour-wise a bit like our first one. I think we're starting to... Are we? Are we not? Are we starting to get the most out of the tea? No, that looks pretty dark again. As I say, this is robust stuff. It takes... I'd say that's somewhere between the first and the second steeping. I'm not sure. My camera's not going to be able to pick that up. Maybe if I put it there. That's somewhere between our first and our second steeping. And then we will leave that as our last one. So let's see what's coming out on this. meaty. Smoky, slightly smoky, meaty on the smell. Just savouriness. That's really what's coming out. I couldn't even really pin down earth and dark. It's just an incredibly savoury experience for this steeping. But that medicinal quality has come back. So, in conclusion, bearing in mind I haven't adjusted the temperature in this for the sake of time constraints, and I haven't adjusted the amount of water, you can see that each steeping provides something different. A lot of the flavour molecules are thought to do with that medicinal quality, and I haven't really been able to pin it out. They came out of the first steeping, and they're only sort of peeking out in later ones. Once again, I can recommend this tea. I can recommend this set of instructions, which I will provide below, and the website that they came from. I do hope this video has been of some use and, in an ideal world, of some interest. It remains for me only to say happy steeping and to say God bless.